All right, what's going on, guys? So in today's video, we're going to be finally putting the engine back into the Galant. As you can see, it is all back together, at least for the most part. Of course, you didn't see my last video. We did the timing on it. I did switch from the Galant belt to the Evo belt just because it's a lot easier to do with the engine out of the car. Now, I do still have to put the timing cover back on, the oil filter housing, and with a pickup tube bolts on, but I'm going to do that once it's in the car. That way I have I have easy access to it. I also am going to replace my rear motor mount with my DIY solid mount. There's nothing wrong with this one. It actually looks to be in pretty good shape. Of course, I'll inspect it more once I get in there. And then I think I'm going to do something with this rust that's in here. You can see there's a little bit of surface rust and some down here, some underneath the mount over here, and just a few other places that I want to get into this engine bay, just clean a few things up while I have the opportunity. Now, if you haven't seen the DIY solid mounts, go ahead and check that video out. That is what we have here. This is basically just a factory mount filled with window weld. It's definitely a cheap performance mod that I feel like is worth it. I'm just going to be replacing the front and the rear. I'm going to leave the two side ones stock just because I don't feel like those are as critical. It really shouldn't be too difficult to get this engine back in here. The one task you do face is because this dolly that it's on is pretty low. So you do have to worry about that, and I have to figure out something as far as how I'm going to get this up. And plus, if you guys remember, I took the head off of it when taking it out because it made it easier to pull the engine out from under the car. So if you look at it now, see this huge dent where somebody used this as a jacking point. This is why you don't do that. But it looks to be like the car is high enough to go with the engine under it. So it should be good to go as far as height wise. Now I did have to use, of course, my jack with some blocks of wood on it, on the subframe to get that up that high. But it shouldn't be that big a deal. We should be able to slide the engine underneath it and then drop the entire car down onto the engine. Now, I'm sure it's going to take some persuasion to get it in, but it should go pretty quickly. And then, of course, once we get the engine in, the hard part is done. We can move on to the other projects like getting the turbo kit and everything back in. I'm really anxious to see how this thing's going to feel. I fixed a few exhaust leaks, plus now that I have a clutch that will hold the power. I think it's going to be a completely different experience. Not to mention, after I've confirmed that this thing is running right, we will be turning up the boost another 10 pounds up to 20. So you guys make sure, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for that. And make sure you catch that video. I'm really excited about it. Like I said, we are at the end of this rebuild, of this first rebuild. Alright guys, so I got a lot of that surface rust taken care of. I did go ahead and clean out those threads and the new bolts with my chaser, and I spray painted over the bare metal spots that I made with that wire wheel. So obviously I have to let the paint dry, and seeing as how it's already past midnight, I'm going to go ahead and call this tonight, and I will catch you guys in the morning. Alright guys, so another episode of It Can Go Wrong, It Will. I was just bolted on the accessories. See, I got my power steering pump on. I was putting the alternator on. And of course, you may know that the alternator has this bracket on here, and it actually shares this hole with the water pump. So I take the bolt out, no problem. Go to bolt it back in, and what do you know? And I wasn't using my impact to tighten it down. I was just using a 3/8 ratchet with my hands and a couple fingers, and it snapped with very little effort. Now, because of the design of this engine, that means I have to take this pulley back off in order to get to the water pump, so I can take all these bolts out and then try to extract it from the block if it isn't too bad. It looks like it snapped off pretty high, so I'm hoping the threads are still exposed on the other side. So if you can see, it wasn't even all the way in. So I'm hoping there's some threads sticking out of the block, and I can grab it with a pair of pliers or something and then turn it out. So this right here is an example of no matter what you do, stuff's still gonna happen. Now I did clean, all of these holes, but this is a part of it, so I figured I'd document it for you. I'm gonna get taking this back off, doing this again. So now looking at this, so unfortunately the bolt is snapped clean off in the hole, but fortunately there's not a lot of torque on the screw. So what I noticed is I can actually turn it on this little lip here, and I can turn this bolt in the hole. If you guys can see, it's kind of hard to do with one hand, but it looks like I'll be able to back this out just with this screwdriver. But anyway, I'm gonna keep working with this. Hopefully I'll be able to back it out. Looks like I'm probably gonna have to get a new gasket because you can't tell because of the copper spray, but it actually ripped the gasket right here. So I'm gonna see if one of the stores around me has another gasket in stock. If not, I'm just gonna RTV this thing, button it back up. All right, guys. So I was able to get the bolt out. You can see it was just the tip of it that snapped off. Because only about half of the threads were actually in the block. All right, so she is together, at least for the most part. I haven't put the AC compressor on yet just because of the way it's sitting on the dolly, I can't get to it. But that's no problem because I can get to that easily once it's in the car. So I'll put that on and the belt once I get it in here. But now all we gotta do is slide this thing under here. All right, guys, so that is what we're looking at. You want to try to get it as centered as possible. Right now it's clear of everything. I know I'm gonna need to shift it over as soon as I start lowering the car, but that's fine. Because right now I want to make sure that everything on the top of the engine clears. And of course I'll get that hose out of the way. And so you guys have a reference on how high the car is. And you can see the jack stands are pretty far extended. So it does have to go up quite a ways. But now all I have to do is get the jack back under the subframe. I'm going to go from the side, put the blocks of wood under it, lift it off of the jack stands completely, and then we'll just start lowering it down gradually. But we're basically going to set the frame of the car on the ground. Like, so this is what we're going to be doing. It's got 3 blocks of wood. I think I only used 2 to get it up this high. And so this is going to try to line this up. All right, so at this point I've got the jack stands, my wheels, and everything from under the car. Like, so now would be a good time to have a second set of eyes because we're going to begin to lower the car. All right, so I think we're good to go. Our position looks pretty good. Of course, when you have the engine in here, it's going to have to go a little bit closer forward than you would once it's done, just so you can have space to clear that rear engine mount. So once I get it over the subframe, I can start pushing the engine back. So I've got it pretty close to the ground. I mean, right now, I've got my jack underneath of the transmission. And I'm just going to try to lift this bit up. Now, this is going to be a little difficult, because the engine really needs to sit forward a little bit so that I can get that engine mount or that bracket over that engine mount in the back. Because without doing that, nothing else is going to line up. All right, guys, so the memory card on my camera filled up and I didn't realize it. But I did get the engine mostly in right now. It was actually easier for me to get this mount first because it just naturally kind of fell that way. Now, I did have to persuade it, of course. So I would say if you're doing this, a set of pry bars is critical. And it's not completely tightened down yet, but as you can see, more than half of the threads are in both. Same thing on this one. Since I did take the mount off, just so I didn't have to worry about fitting it underneath there, I got the studs lined up, and then once it was able to fall over, I just started tightening them down. But you can see this one isn't completely tight. I'm actually going to try to clean these threads because this actually won't thread down by hand any further. I got the mount in the back. It is over the top where it needs to be, so it's pretty close, so I can get that bolt in. And yeah, you can see what I did. It said that right now the jack is underneath the transmission. I did, when I got that mount in, I did put the jack under here on the dolly, and that's how I actually got that side lined up. So the engine is almost back in. I just have to tighten up these 2 mounts, and of course that bottom one is easy. Now, to do this, you really need 2 jacks. Now, I don't have 2 currently, and I think I need to go ahead and pick up one. But you really need 2 floor jacks. Even if you have, one of these bigger ones and a smaller one, it will be a huge help. What I end up doing, and this is definitely a little sketchy, is I use the factory scissor jack to help move the body of the car while I use this to move the engine. And you want to make sure that you keep your hands and toes and everything clear of any of these parts, which is why I was using the pry bars to move the engine around. So of course we have a few more things we need to do, mainly on the bottom of the engine. Of course we have to attach the oil filter housing and the pickup tube. So I've already put everything back on here, and I didn't put the oil filter housing back on just because it was on a dolly. But then I went ahead and put it back together. So the timing cover, I'm going to have to loosen some of those bolts so I can squeeze the oil filter housing on, because that is what goes, of course, right here. The pickup tube is not going to be a big deal because you can get to that easily once the oil pan is removed. But I did want to show you guys one thing. Something I'm actually excited about installing, oddly enough, and that's this right here. So I have a stud and of course the nut that goes with it, and this is going to be for the oil pan. I got 4 of these, and I'm going to mount these in each corner on the block. This will help you line up your oil pan when you go to install it. So if you use gasket maker on your oil pan before, you know that if you don't get your holes exactly lined up, some of that gasket maker can end up getting in some of those bolt holes, clogging them up, just causing problems. So what these are going to do is help me line the oil pan up so that I won't have that issue. Now I am using an actual gasket from Felpro just because I have an extra one, so I won't really have that much of an issue, but these will be a big help lining the oil pan up. Now I don't remember the length of it, but I do know these oil pan bolts are an M6 by 1.0 thread pitch, and this one is just under an inch. I want to say it's like 21 millimeters. I think is what it was. You may even want to get one that's a little bit longer, especially if you are using RTV, and I'll show you guys why once I get under the car. But you can see the studs here. They're actually the perfect length to match up with the stock bolts. Not much of it left, so you could definitely get away with using a longer stud, and that would help you line it up. So none of the oil pan is off. You can see the studs a little bit more easily. Right now they're just in here hand tight. You can put Loctite on them if you want to. I don't think that's going to be needed. Like the pickup tube hadn't been installed yet, so I got to get that on here. And then, like I said, my oil filter housing, which is going on the back, I got to get that installed, and then we can button the bottom of this up. You can just hand screw them in until they bottom up. They don't need a lot of torque. Even your factory bolts, oil pan bolts, are only torqued to like 10 foot-pounds or so. So the first thing I'm going to do is the simplest, and that's just to install the pickup tube. There's a gasket that goes behind there. And if you guys are wondering, this is not the same pickup tube from the engine that had the spun bearings, of course. Alright guys, so here is the oil pan that was on the car. And as you can tell, almost immediately, is that my bearings are completely trashed, probably throughout the whole block. So if you look, all this gray / silver that you see, this is all what used to be bearing material. This is all bits of metal that at some point was pumping through the engine. Obviously, I'm going to have to clean this. You don't want to put something like this back on your car because it can get pumped back through the engine. Of course, your first thoughts probably, hey, I have an oil filter, won't it pick it up? It'll pick up most of it, but not all of it. And you really don't want to get any metal in your oil that'll make its way down into your bearings between your crank, because that can cause you to spin another bearing. And it's kind of like an ongoing problem if you don't clean everything really well. So I'm going to go ahead and pressure wash this, blow it out with some compressed air, clean it up real well, probably wash it a couple times before I put this thing back on the car, because I don't want to have another problem because I didn't clean the oil pan. The good news is my welding job held up just fine. We can see, like, I did that with my flux weld. I'm actually pretty happy with how that came out. It wasn't leaking. And you may also notice this has a Felpro gasket on it, which I know some people don't like these, but this was holding up just fine. And the cleanup should be pretty easy. Looks like it's going to peel off for the most part. So you can see this actually came up. It's coming up pretty easily for the most part. Peeling right off. A couple areas where it's sticking. Alright guys, so as I'm putting everything back together, I'm actually about to mount the tire back on the car just to get it out of the way. So of course, the axle is in and the axle nut is tight. Got my brake line attached. So everything here is good and it's been tightened down. Maybe wondering where I got these black lug nuts. So these are actually just some cheapo units from Amazon. At least 4 of them. Of course, this is a locking nut. So of course, these came with a set of 20. And there's this company right here. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that, but this is the company. The wheel studs themselves they're okay. You can see the coating. Like the coating has come off a little bit. You're really not supposed to use, or they suggest not using an impact with these, but you know, I don't really care about that. They're made out of steel. Not really worried about the coating come off. Like for the most part, these did the job. Of course, these were the factory ones that were on the Steelies. So of course you can't use these with the Eclipse wheels. So I got this, and this is the package they came in. So they're actually packaged fairly well. So if you haven't caught it already, it's this one right here. This one is different. This is actually a completely different lug nut with a completely different thread pattern. And it came in the box just like this. They were just lined up. So that is one thing you sacrifice with cheaper parts. The quality control is not there because any reputable brand is not going to miss the fact that this is obviously different than this. but they've held up well. So I did want to mention that to you guys. Again, they're pretty good quality for the price that you pay, but you do have to look out for that. All right, so I just talked about the lug nuts, but in case you were wondering how these tires fit, all I can tell you is they are a lot better than the factory ones. I didn't have those grip issues, but we'll see once we turn up the boost. But they are rubbing. So if you can see the little, you can see that little white mark right there. That is where the tire was rubbing. It's the same way on the other side. Like, see the little white mark there? That is where the tire was rubbing on the inside of the wheel well. It's the same thing on the other side, so it's not a huge deal, and it only seems to happen when the wheel is at full lock. It also has rubbed a nice little hole, like in this little splash guard thing here. So just to remind you guys, in case you're new to the channel, these are, of course, the factory Eclipse GT wheels. These are the GT wheels mounted with a Kenda Kaiser and a 235 by 40 by 18. These are kind of like that semi-slick. They like a 300 tread wear, so they're a pretty soft tire. They are definitely a lot stickier than the economy tires that were on here. It is a good size tire. I really wanted to go wider. But of course, with the factory strut, if you remember from my coilover video, it's actually too big for you to fit this tire. So you'll definitely need a aftermarket coilover without any issues. All right, so that's really it, guys. I'm going to go ahead and wrap the video up here. I feel like we've made a ton of progress, but we do still have a little ways to go. I want to thank you guys for watching my video. If you haven't already, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you continue to share my videos so the channel can grow. Have a great day.